Welcome to another skills video with Sydney and Sam. Today we're going to be talking through Dear Man, which is part of the Interpersonal Effectiveness module. So this is going to be handout number 5 in that Interpersonal Effectiveness section. So feel free to grab that before we get started. Dear Man is a lovely skill. It's a skill I use all the time. It's one I coach clients through all the time. And this skill is basically a way for you to get what you want and need in the context of relationships, and to do so skillfully while both kind of respecting and maintaining the relationship as needed, and being really clear about what is this thing that you want. This also helps us say no. And we're going to go through an example that Sam has had recently, and how she effectively said no to an opportunity. And then give you a way to practice this on your own. So let's dive in. Dear Man is another acronym. We know DBT loves their acronyms. We'll start with the Dear portion. And this is the script that we are going to use when delivering either an ask or when we're saying no. And I'll hold to, I think this is super effective, especially in situations where we're noticing lots of anxiety, or if the stakes are pretty high, or perhaps if maybe you have a long-standing argument or conflict with partner that you have a hard time talking about. This is a way for you to shift the narrative, right? So this is when we want to be really thoughtful in our asks. Sam, anything else you want to give, like big picture, before we dive in and just start talking through what DEAR actually stands for?
One way that I like to think about kind of the dear and the man portions, if we think back to our mindfulness, the dear is kind of the what and the man is the how. Yeah, that's it.
I absolutely love that. I was having that thought, so thank you. Yeah, so let's start moving through the dear and see what comes up. I'm going to start by just explaining and kind of walking through a recent example for me, and then we will shift over to Sam and she'll kind of practice it more so. So the D on the dear is going to be describe. And again, thinking back to our mindfulness skills, this is just like the describe when you are just stating the facts, trying to keep the judgments at bay, or at least to notice our judgments. And we want to kind of present the situation in a way that's going to be non-defensive and very clear. So I'll give you just a brief situation for me. I recently, my youngest brother had been staying with me for a hot second. And every time he would leave the space he was occupying, I would go in and it was like tornado. Kind of, gave me flashbacks to when my mom would walk into my room and be like, what is happening here? And so I absolutely adore my brother. But here's a situation, a describe for me for this would be, okay, so I've noticed when you leave the space, specifically the fold out bed is still out, blankets are all over the floor, clothes are all over. I could get more specific here, like noticing clothes on the bed and on the couch and on the floor. And maybe I would say something, if effective, right? I could maybe leave this part out, but like, and I've noticed an odor start to emanate from this space. And you want to be careful. You want to be effective here. So for example, if my brother would not respond to that and maybe feel a little hurt by me mentioning an odor, then I might leave that part out. I happen to know my brother just has pretty thick skin. And so I might be able to mention that in a way that is just clear and upfront. So that's the D portion. We are just laying out the facts of the situation. This really helps to set the stage. The E is express. And this is where we are going to bring relevant opinions and feelings and thoughts to the table. This is where we want to be very careful about considering what is effective here. Okay, so me saying like, gosh, I noticed the judgment that you are an absolute slob is probably not going to motivate my brother to clean the space, which is my goal. And so I might instead say, gosh, when I walk into this room, I notice some anxiety, and I might own that as mine, right? Like I might say, I know that I'm more kind of anxious than you are, and that's okay. And like I'm just wondering if you can kind of meet me where I'm at here, right? Um, yeah, it can be helpful to kind of come from I language. I don't know, any other thoughts you have about the express section, Sam?
I think that this can also be a good place to mention the impact that the other person is having. Um, so, like Sydney said, gosh, I'm noticing a lot of anxiety when I walk into this space. And sometimes I feel like my space isn't being respected.
Add there. I really like that. Yeah. And you'll notice too, even in the tone, and we'll get to this when we shift over to the man portion, but Sam is saying that in a very gentle way, and we do want to keep that in mind. The A is going to be assert. So this is where you make your ask. This is where you lay out very clearly exactly what you want to see happen. And it can be helpful to add a timeline as well. We want to be as specific as possible so that, my brother, for example, isn't left wondering what am I supposed to do here? And so this is where I might say like, all right, cool. I would really appreciate if when you are leaving my space, you could just make sure to kind of condense some of your things either into the closet, and that can look however you like, because as long as I don't see it, that's fine, or right in a small space in the room so that the room is still accessible. And I might also say, in addition, if you could please fold up the bed, that would be really helpful for me. Okay, so I'm being really clear. And again, for the timeline, I might say, I would like to see this happen every time you're leaving. Okay, when you're in there, it's okay, but when you're leaving, because that's kind of what's important to me. And then the R is reinforce. And this is where we want to help motivate this other person and have them or help them find some, drive to do the thing we want to do. And this can be as simple as, gosh, I would be so appreciative if you could do this, right? If you think they really care about you and want to respond to your needs, this can be a space where you're just like, I really need this. Please, can you support me? I would feel better. You might also hold the relationship, right? I might say, like, I can stop nagging you, which I know you really don't like, if you can do this for me. Or, right, say it's a kid or say it's someone who's more food motivated, for example. You might say, I will buy your favorite candy bar if you can do this for me. And know just if you're going to offer reinforce, follow up on the reinforce so that they know their hard work or the thing that they've done for you will be rewarded. Sam, maybe let's walk through an example where we're saying no, because I think this is just as important, if not more important.
Yes,
And giving us brief situation.
absolutely. So the point that Sydney and I are at in the program, in our doctoral program right now, we just got our next clinical placements kind of all set and figured out. And I was noticing a lot of feelings of anxiety about my next placements. And yes, I said placements plural. We're getting there. Um, and I was also noticing that I was feeling overwhelmed and almost like scared to start. And so I sat down with my advisor and I pointed this out. Um, and the situation is that we mapped out how many hours I committed to. And it turns out that I committed to 64 hours a week. And my advisor would like to limit me to a 40-hour work week that I think is a reasonable ask. And so where that left me was having to go back and say no to one of the sites that offered me a placement. And what's a little bit tricky here is that I had initially said yes. And so I kind of had these options where I could continue with my original commitment and do 64 hours a week and probably burn myself out. Or I could be a bit more effective and I could say no to this site. And so I said no to the site.
Yes. And I will talk about how that looked in a hot second. I just noticed here, right? This is a situation where I bet, Sam, your tendency, like without being mindful and without like considering what would be effective, would be just to like grin and bear it, right? Work your 64 hours a week, burn out, whatever that would look like. And so here's a great situation for a dear man because she really has to challenge herself and really has to think, okay, how do I be effective here? Because it's a tricky situation, right? So why don't you walk us through what was your describe as you were reaching out and trying to say no to something you had already said yes to?
So the describe portion looked like describing what some of my other commitments are. And also laying the fact out on the table that yes, I did commit to this. And this other stuff came up and this other stuff is happening.
I love that. I love that. And what was your express? What feelings and opinions was really relevant for you to convey?
My express looked like conveying why the other opportunities that I have are very important to me, and why I am not willing to compromise there. Um, my express also looked like expressing my honest concern that I don't think I can do 64 meaningful hours in a week. And I wouldn't feel right committing to a site and then not giving it my all and not being the most effective therapist I can be there.
That feels like a really good point too, and that kind of sets them up to understand where you're coming from and also realize, right, like had you tried to go forward with all of this, you might have been a little less effective, right? Like that may have not gone so well even from their perspective too. So this kind of right felt really important for you to express. That's great. And what was the ask, or what was the specific thing that you were saying no to, and how did you say that in a very clear manner?
Yes. My assert there was that I will not be able to do that site next year. And the specific way that I said that to make it super clear was I know that I've committed to this site. And unfortunately, for the reasons that I just discussed, I will need to rescind my original acceptance of that offer.
So beautifully clear. I actually had run into this similar situation a couple months prior. And in my email, I was a little less clear. Sam got to read my email, I think, to help inspire her own. And I said something like, hope this is okay. And you'll notice that that leaves wiggle room, right? And Sam did a really good job here of just being like, I can't do this. And in a way that was firm and respectful still, though, right? That's great. And then how did you reinforce them for kind of acquiescing with your request?
One of my favorite reinforcers is to say thank you for understanding before they've even responded, because it kind of sets the stage to make them a little bit more understanding. And I also offered to reach out to other students that I know and get somebody else to interview for that placement so that they aren't short a student therapist.
I absolutely love that. And yeah, way to cue up the understanding. Like, gosh, thank you so much for responding to my human that overcommitted and understanding. And thank you for your humanity in return. Totally spot on. Well,
And
yeah.
really quick, one of the things that I um, that I go to for my reinforcers, I am very prone to over apologizing.
Mhm.
And I think we will talk about that a little bit in the man portion. And so what I do for my reinforcers is whenever I feel pulled to over apologize, I say thank you instead.
Mm.
And so in that email, I felt so pulled to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And so instead, I said, thank you for understanding.
Love it. So skillful. And yeah, that cues us up really nicely to shift into the man portion. And we'll just walk through this briefly and kind of apply it to Sam's case. So the first part of the man, and again, this is how we are kind of delivering this either ask or no. The first is to stay mindful. This that's really important is when you are communicating with someone who has a tendency maybe to try to drag you off track, whether that be with accusations, right? I don't know if you've ever made an ask like, please, can you take out the trash? And maybe a partner or someone else will say, do the dishes, and then I'll take out the trash. And like, notice how it's really easy to kind of start playing tug of war here. When we are being mindful, we are just keeping our eyes on the prize, keeping our ask in mind, and just gently, continually bringing the conversation back. So if someone says in response to me saying, please take out the trash, they say, do the dishes. I say, I hear you. Talk about that later. Please, can we talk about how to get this trash thing to happen, right? It's just this gentle, like, come back, please. This is the topic at hand. Anything you want to add to that before we talk about confidence?
A couple of the specifics for being mindful are called broken record, which is one of my favorites. And that's just exactly what Sydney said, is just reiterating that ask like a broken record. And kind of one of the other specifics is ignoring attacks and diversions. And so that's also what Sydney was saying was, as hard as it is, ignoring the diversion of if you do the dishes. And this can be really hard, especially if somebody's attacking us, and especially if the other person isn't being as skillful as we are. And so I just want to hold up that the staying mindful piece can be a lot harder than it sounds sometimes.
Totally. It's really hard and it's really important.
Yes.
We can't control that other person, but we can control us here. Good. So the second part of the man is appearing confident. And I think, Sam, even as you were talking through, you did a really good job of kind of like leaning in a little bit. You'll notice her shoulders are down and back, right? Maybe our chin is raised a little bit. We're making eye contact. And we are having kind of a steady tone of voice. Talking, you'll notice I'm probably talking a little bit slower. That's how I try to convey confidence. Sam, any other ways in which you try to bring confidence to the table?
For me, it's the steering away from apologies, because I think that over apologizing can make us appear a lot less confident. And so that is one of my tips for appearing confident, is to stay away from unjustified apologies.
I love that. And if you're someone that's prone to over apologizing like Sam and I, this is a good space to start considering, what might you replace the apologies with? Sam mentioned, she says thank you instead. I love that, right? And another way we might think about that is, how can we describe what it is we're feeling instead of leaning on our apology, right? Oftentimes we'll say, I'm sorry, right? So instinctively. And no matter the situation, that others like don't really understand, one, what we're apologizing for, two, what we're feeling. And so I might say, right, sure, I noticed some guilt at X, Y, or Z, right? Or I am noticing the thought that I have done this thing wrong, and thus the urge to apologize. So if needed, I would say lean on the describe skills and think about, what you might replace apologies with. And then the last part of the man is going to be to negotiate, right? And we might use this more or less depending on the situation. Okay, if there's someone really, really important to us and we really value that relationship, it's our top priority, we might be a little bit more willing to flex. If it's someone we don't care about and our goal is the absolute priority, then we may not be prepared to flex at all. And all of those things are okay, but think about ahead of time what you are willing to do so that when they make the ask or try to pull for negotiations, you already know what you are willing to give in order to get. And that saves us, I think, from committing to things we might not actually be willing or wanting to do, right? Like Sam here, if they had come back and said, well, can you just do part time? And had Sam not thought about that ahead of time, she might be really pulled to be like, sure, yeah, that's fine. I'll do it. Okay.
Yes.
Right. So that has to be something that we give forethought to, especially if you're someone that finds yourself on either end. If you're a party, right, that's like, nope, I want this, I get this, no matter the relationship. And you got to start thinking, right? Like, this person matters to me. Where can I flex? And on the other side, if you're willing, or if you normally say like, yes, I'll do it. Like, okay, where do we set some limits here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the first draft of my email, I left wiggle room for flexibility where I wasn't truly flexible. And Sydney was reading it for me. And she said to me, are you really willing to flex there? Like, no, I'm not. And so I went back and I was a bit more clear and stern on my limits there. And so I think, like Sydney said, it's so important to be thinking about the negotiation points that you're willing and not willing to do ahead of time. Yeah.
And always feel free to phone a friend, especially if
Yes.
you're approaching a really difficult dear man. I think it's a good space to write out your script, have someone else review it, and then revise. And you might too, if this is really hard for you, practice a few times. And especially if that like confidence portion too, that's something you can practice. Practice in the mirror, right? Practice with a friend that's more of a trusted other. And on that note, let me share homework with you briefly. Looks a little wonky right now, but it's hoping it'll make intuitive sense. So, dear Man Worksheet, you're going to start by clarifying goals. So, like I said, and like we talked about in the last video, sometimes the relationship is more important. Sometimes it's the goal, and sometimes it's self respect. And so, figure out what's most important here. And then we want you to go through, we want you to write your script with the dear portion and really think about what's important in terms of the man portion and how can you practice. If you have a chance to deliver your dear man, as Sam already did, I'd love you to reflect on how did it go? What did you learn? And where do you feel like you still need support? Right? I happen to know that Sam did deliver her dear man, and she hasn't heard back yet, right? And though this is a space for her to really reflect on how was it for me to take the time to do this? And even now, like, what might be different than had I just like randomly sent a quick fire email that was maybe a little less effective? So, okay, I'll leave this for you. If you have questions, you know how to get a hold of us, just shoot us an email. But we really appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you for the next video.